Hey, this is Don Bentley, and you are watching the Crew Reviews.
Hey boys,
Mm-hmm.
hey boys,
Yeah.
let's raise a glass.
What?
Don Bentley is back on the show, and so is Mike.
Yay. I missed one and you guys like fall apart on me. What's
Yeah,
going
we
on
did.
with
We fell
that?
apart.
Can I
Mm.
tell you that I had your Crew Reviews cool little shot glass for the last 2 years, and it was perfect. And then we had company over, and somebody loaded it in the dishwasher, and
That's
now
what it does.
No,
gone.
it's hand wash or display only.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even
yeah.
hand wash it.
Yeah. Loses the
Display
flavor like a
only.
barbecue grill.
All right. So Don, you've been on the show numerous times. You know how
Yes.
this goes.
Yes.
So why don't you give our audience a spoiler-free 35,000-foot view of what they can expect when they crack open Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan Jr. book number 16, Flashpoint.
Flashpoint. So, my long-suffering editor, Tom Colgan, said
Tom
that it
Colgan.
is probably actually a Jack Ryan Sr. book. And so I'm choosing to believe he meant that in a good way. And I think the reason why he's saying that is that instead of just seeing Jack Ryan Jr., you get to see bigger kind of geopolitical stakes, and you get to see what's happening in the White House at the same time. And so my last assignment in the Army was in Germany, and we lived just northwest of a little town called Regensburg. And my youngest daughter was actually born in Regensburg. And so the book starts with kind of a supposedly a benign surveillance mission that's happening in Regensburg. Because if you've been following in the Bentley saga of Clancy books, there are two Green Berets that got introduced with Target acquired and have been along for the ride since. And this is kind of their campus shakeout tour. And so what starts as kind of a benign surveillance operation in the University of Regensburg takes kind of a crazy turn when some Chinese operatives rendition a scientist in front of Jack Ryan and the team. And that leads to much bigger stakes in the South China Sea, where the United States and China are kind of stumbling towards war. And so it's very much obviously a fiction book, but many of the things covered in it are either based on actual events or on things that could happen. And so it was super fun to write. There were a lot of different points of view character. I got to bring a submarine back. There's a whole lot of Easter eggs in there for folks who are fans of the original Clancy series. And it was a big book. It was my first kind of, even though I write the Jack Ryan Jr. Books, my first attempt at kind of the larger Jack Ryan universe. So it was really fun to write, and hopefully it was fun to read.
No, definitely. But so Jack Ryan Jr. is a poster boy for Do It Now and Ask Forgiveness Later.
Yeah.
Is that how you approach him when writing his scenes, his point of view? Was there some other compelling characteristic that stands out in your mind's eye?
No, that's a good question. So one of the things when you come to these books and you get a chance to take over a legacy series from another writer, I think one of the things that you try and do as a writer is say, what's some untilled soil? What's an area of this universe that I can explore a little bit more? And so Jack Ryan Jr. up until this point was very much kind of a ready, fire, aim kind of dude. And so what I started with in Target Acquired was there were two different things I thought about as I sat to write my first Clancy book. The first one being that he's now in his early 30s, and his father, when his father was that same age, he had a wife, he had children, he had a stable life, and Jack Ryan Jr. has kind of had the opposite of that, right? The second thing being kind of what you alluded to is that really the only reason why Jack Ryan Jr. was part of this whole campus team is because his last name was Ryan, right? He wasn't a paramilitary officer, didn't come from special operations, wasn't, from the CIA.
A legacy. Yeah.
A legacy. Yeah, exactly. And so to me, I started thinking, well, I bet he's been spending most of his time trying to prove that he actually belongs here. And so what you see in Target Acquired is kind of this concerted effort on his part to say, what would happen if I actually started behaving like the person I want to be treated as instead of the junior member of the team? And so I kind of took that a step further in my second book, which was 0 Hour, where you see his first time kind of as a pseudo team leader, where he gets thrown together with a team. And then I wanted to take that even further with Flashpoint, where for those of us who have served in law enforcement or the military and something, when you're a team leader and things go wrong, you bear the burden of that thing going wrong. And so I wanted to very much see what that looked like from him, where now he's recognized potentially as a peer, but the operation goes off the rails and he has to deal with some very real repercussions of that. And so I think to your point, that's always been kind of who he was as a character, but I think I wanted to try and push on that a little bit and say, what would it look like if he kind of grew into his role a little bit?
I think you could clarify that had you let that one scene in there where it flashes back to his high school football coach giving him that whole speech about what the difference is between a leader and a star player. I think that would have.
It's fiction. It's fiction.
Yeah. Of course, that's not real. But
is that guy's name was Sean Cameron, and your name is Sean Cameron. How weird is that?
Coincidence. Yeah. And I almost became a priest. Not really, but thought about it. So you kind of actually addressed some of this in your first answer, but to my ear, that you have a very distinctive voice as a writer, and it carries over from your Matt Drake novels into the Jack Ryan Jr. novels, even though there's definitely a delineation. But in Flashpoint, there definitely seems to be this channeling of sort of the late great Tom Clancy, and as you mentioned, it might be the scope of the plot that drove that feeling more of a Jack Senior style than Junior. But did you feel as you were writing it a little bit of a throwback sort of kind of enter your vibe, and then sort of beyond the cast of characters, do you adjust your approach writing in the Clancy universe versus writing in the Matt Drake universe?
Yeah, so what I try and do before I write every Clancy book is to go back to one that he wrote that I really liked and read it again, and both to read it again to kind of level set what he did, and not necessarily to try and copy it, because I don't think I'm a good enough writer to do that, but to remember as a fan what I loved about what he did. And then I think one of the things readers like is that when you pay homage to those classic books in your book, and you kind of point back towards them, and the folks that are the real fans, the hardcore fans, get those references. And so I knew for this book that I wanted to tell a bigger story. And so I knew I'd need like a vantage point into the White House. And so Mark Cameron and I have to deconflict characters and viewpoints and stuff like that, because he's a fantastic writer. But if in his book usually comes out right before mine, in this case, there'll be two of mine in a row. So right after this will be Weapons Grade, and then his last one will come out. But because he writes Jack Ryan Sr., I knew that if I tried to write Jack Ryan Sr., it would probably give the reader whiplash, just because he and I would write them slightly different in the same way he writes Clark, and if I wrote Clark. And so I knew I needed a character to be able to serve as the reader's vantage point into the White House. And so I thought about Mary Pat, and then right before this book, I read Cardinal of the Kremlin, which is kind of Mary Pat's big book devoted to her. And so that kind of got me, it helps me kind of cleanse my palate, if you will, when I move from the Matt Drake to the Clancy book, is I'll usually, like I said, read one of the original Clancy books to get back in that universe. And then I'll try and pick the book that I think is most apt to the one that I'm going to write. So 0 Hour, there's kind of the climax of 0 Hour. There's a scene where Jack and the two Green Berets are on top of a hillside. And so I read Clear and Present Danger before that, because I knew it was going to be kind of that paramilitary. And that book has, you know, one of the best climactic scenes where Ding Chavez and the remnants of the infantry guys are on this in the hillside on in the middle of the Colombian jungle, and Jack and Clark have to keep and go rescue them. Mm-hmm. And so I do that, like I said, both to try and hopefully have a better vantage point into the book, and then try and put as many references and stuff to the book that I can in mind, and just try and get my head straight for that. I think the other part that it helps a lot to have Tom Colgan as the editor for both books, because he sees the Matt Drake books and he sees the Clancy books. And so he's both the guardrails for the Clancy series, and he realizes what I do in my books. And so I trust him to come back and say, in Target Acquired, there were parts where he would mark it up and he'd be like, you know, Jack Ryan Jr. would never talk to Clark this way, or, you know, what you're seeing here, this feels more like Matt Drake than it does Jack Ryan Jr. So he's really good to be able to deconflict both of those. And then, like I said, I try and put my own self in the right headspace by reading one of the Clancy books before I start working on them.
Yeah. Have you reread all of the Clancy books?
Not all of them, but a lot of them. Because part of it too will be like, I know he did. So I can't remember if this was Clear and Present Danger as well. The Clancy book that had the Afghan subplot, and then it had the Star Wars system, and then the scientists getting captured and stuff like that. And it, like, I thought in that one he did such a great, and HRT goes in and rescues the American. I thought that one was so interesting because Clancy took this whole Star Wars technology and had this subplot going on the entire time, and you're trying to figure out, like, what does this actually have to do with the rest of the book? And then you see it all come together. And so in my book, in Flashpoint, there is this not just a technology, but another subplot where the Chinese are a faction within the Chinese Communist Party has found this deposit of metallic nodules on the seabed floor of the South China Sea. And so as you're doing that, you're like, what does this have to do with Jack Ryan Jr. and Regensburg? And so I knew I wanted those to come together, but I went back to some of the older Clancy books to kind of refresh myself of how he was able to take these two seemingly disparate plot streams and then merge them back together at the end.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, I mean, there's a crazy amount of expectations in the Clancy books from his longtime readers, like a guy my age who like started out when he started out. We've been reading him. And so what's that balancing act like for you to keep the older base happy, but still make it kind of fresh for even maybe some of the newer readers, and, you know, keeping yourself not feeling like you're operating as an author in this super confined space, and it kind of, you know, takes away some of like the gist of like who you are as an author and how you want to present that in his old universe. What's that like, that balancing act like?
Yeah, so Tom Colgan was super helpful for that when I started writing the books, and he was very, very clear about two things. Excuse me. The first being, he said that what he's really good at as an editor is picking the right writers to write a legacy series. And he said, you know, I picked you, you're the right writer, so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to stay up at night and think, you know, am I the right guy for the job? The second thing he said is, like, I just want you to write fan fiction in the Tom Clancy universe. And so he's like, don't try and write like Tom Clancy. He's like, do what you do with your Matt Drake books, but do them in the Clancy universe with his characters. Having said that, I'm also, I keep in mind the fan expectations. And so while I bring in, when I sat down, or when I pitched to Tom Colgan the idea for Target Acquired, I said, hey, I want to do a stripped down book that really focuses just on Jack Ryan Jr., because I want to make sure as a writer that I have him nailed without bringing in, you know, the other characters for the campus, and kind of, I kind of pitched it as the difference between when you watch the original Iron Man movie, you know, or maybe that's a bad example, because even in the big Avengers, Iron Man has such a huge role. But if you take a minor character like the Black Widow or something, you don't really understand her as a character until you see her spinoff movie. And so for me, Jack Ryan Jr. is such a small character compared to Ding Chavez and Clark and his father and Mary Pat, that when you bring them all on the stage together, he becomes smaller. And so what I wanted to do was write a book that focused the majority on him. And then I still ended up inventing a couple characters, the 2 Green Berets and stuff, because I needed them for that one story, the subplot. And then they were a ton of fun to write, and readers really liked them. So I kept bringing them back. And so what I've gotten, some of the comments on this one, I consciously brought in much more of the campus characters, because I'm like, you know, it's been a while since I've had this. And frankly, there were some things I did in this book that that weren't touched before, that were like, you know, the campus up until now has been this organization that nobody knew. You know, nobody ever knew Jack Ryan Jr. was the president's son. You know, we kind of danced around that, and I ran headlong into a couple of those things. And so I thought, well, I'll bring in more of the campus characters in this one because it's a bigger story. And that's another one where I try and deconflict that with Mark Cameron, and he and I kind of came to an agreement. And he's like, I'll write the old people, you write the young people, and then and to kind of do that. But having said that, because I was like, okay, the fans will like this, I'm doing it. Some of the comments that I've gotten back on the book are like, where's Midas? Where's this guy? Why aren't there more campus people? And I'm like, okay, you know, and some of it, my Tom Colgan always says, don't read the comments. But I feel like, and some of it though still is like, fans have a right to say what they want and what they don't like, and how to do that. And so I know you're never going to satisfy everybody, but I think especially if you're writing a legacy series, you also need to give the people what they want, right? And what they want in the book. Yeah. And so those are more my concern, not as much anymore, quite as much as like the weight of it and everything. Cause I'm in the middle of doing first pass pages for Weapons Grade, which is my 4th Clancy book. And I feel like I understand that universe enough now where I don't approach it with as much hesitancy. But I still always have in the back of my mind, like, what do the fans want? What do the people who are buying these books every time, who buy them without fail, like, am I giving them what they want? And so I do think a lot about that still.
Yeah. Well, there's some epic dialogue between Junior and Clark. You know, considering the, you know, Clark's iconic status with readers in the Clancy verse, I wonder if you fretted over writing that dialogue, or if it just felt natural to you.
No, I did. His scenes are probably the ones that I spend the most time thinking about, is how are the two of them going to talk to each other. And frankly, I think too I think a lot about the layers of their relationship, right? Because you have, on one hand, you have this John Clark is Junior's boss. But it's also kind of like, so when I got out of the Army, I went to work for this company for a couple of years that my dad had worked for 30 years. And so, you know, what I was trying to do the entire time is like, I'm here on my own merit. I should be here. But a lot of people where I worked with would see me as my father's son, right? Because they'd worked with my dad for 30 years.
Right. Were you Bentley Jr.?
I'm not Bentley Jr., fortunately. But so you see that, and so you think, like, how does John Clark see Jack Ryan Jr.? Because on one hand, there's this weird dynamic where whenever you're in, whether it's law enforcement or military, when you're in a vocation where you have to tell people who are under your command to do something that could put them in harm's way and potentially kill them, you maintain a sense of distance between them, right? Because you have to, because at the end of the day, you might tell them you have to go into this building and take care of this guy because it's your job. Yep. And you might not come back out, but that's what we all signed up for. At the same time, there's this second layer there because it's the son of John Clark's, one of his best friends, right? He and Jack Ryan Sr. have been through all these things together. And so I spend a lot of time kind of thinking how they would talk to each other, and what, there's also this weird dynamic where you have to figure that Jack Ryan Jr. has known Clark for most of his life, and then he goes from being this uncle figure to, holy cow, I understand really who he is, and now he's my boss. And so I do spend a lot of time doing that. And what I really love, I still have a hard time reading my books even when they're done, because when I read them, I just see things that I wish I could have changed. But I love listening to them, to have Scott Brick read them. And he does such a good job of voicing Clark that when I hear him read Clark's lines, like, it gives me another idea of who I think Clark is and how he would interact with Jack Ryan Jr. So I do spend a lot of time with
Don,
that.
I wonder, when you hear Scott read back the audiobooks, do you ever go, damn, I wrote that? Or damn, I wrote that? Like,
I actually do. It's funny because my wife gets so frustrated with me because 90% of my writing process is me telling her how much the book sucks, and this is going to be the one. Like, there was
you're a Debbie Downer. You're a Debbie Downer.
I think it was Forgotten War. Like, she was reading the book and she's like, this is actually pretty good. And I'm like, well, of course it's good. What are you talking about? And she's like, for 5 months, you told me how much this book sucked. And I was preparing myself for it to suck. And I was like, oh yeah, I kind of did say that. And so when Clark voices, when Scott Brick voices it, and he does such a good job voicing, like, Jad the Green Beret, I say, is like a SoCal. So Jad in real life is actually a SEAL. So all the jokes I made about Jad the Green Beret being like a SEAL are at his expense, because he really is this suave SEAL guy. And so, but Scott voices them with this, like, Keanu Reeves from Point Break kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just love it. And so it takes you out enough that you're like, this is pretty good. Who wrote this? And you're like, I wrote this.
Yeah,
and so
this guy wrote it.
That is the only time. But if you handed me the book, I'd get 2 paragraphs in, I'm like, I can't believe I didn't catch that, or I can't believe I didn't do that. So,
well, I wonder though, also, do you fret more about upsetting diehard fans or writing more contemporary stories to attract new fans? Like, what's your...
Oh man, that's a good question. I think I don't try and segregate it into new fans and old fans and what they want. What I do try and segregate it into is, like, what's been done already and how much leeway do I have to do something new, from the standpoint of, I think, so I'm a kid of the 80s, like you guys. What was super entertaining is watching my kids discover the A-Team, right? And so for the first 4 episodes, they're like, this is the best TV show ever. And then by the 6th, they quit watching. And I'm like, why did you quit watching? My son's like, because the same thing happens every time, right? Yeah. And so there's some of that you want from a series book. Like, Kyle Mills tells this great story, and I forget which of the Mitch Rapp books it is, but it was his worst reviewed Mitch Rapp book. But at the end of all his negative reviews, the readers would say something like, but it was a good thriller. And he's like, what in the world does that mean? And finally, what he understood they were saying is that Kyle had made this conscious decision to show less of Mitch Rapp and more of another character. And what the readers were saying is, like, we come here to see Mitch Rapp. And so this was a good story, but it's not the story we wanted, because we wanted more of Mitch Rapp. And so I try and keep in mind, like, what are they coming back to see? And you'll see some of them, like in my books, there's usually a funny conversation between Jack Ryan Jr. and Gavin doing something and stepping on it while he's talking on the phone to Jack or something like that. Or a lot of times there's kind of a come to Jesus call between Jack and Clark, where Jack's got to say, yeah, this is what I did dumb again. But then, walking the line to not make it repetitive, but, like I said, this one had a huge subplot that had a submarine, and it hadn't had one of those in a Clancy book before, but I could look back at other Clancy's where he had, like the one I was just telling you about, where he had this subplot that seemingly had nothing to do with the book, and then you see it all crash together. And so to me, it's readers like that, but they don't want that same subplot again, right? And so it's kind of walking that line between, I want to give them something the same but different, the same that this is why I read a Clancy book, but different, so it doesn't feel derivative of the last Clancy book they read.
Awesome. Well, you once again, I have to adjust my question because you touched on parts of this. Long-time Clancy fans, I think, are going to absolutely love this book because of how many characters you do incorporate it. After it was kind of funny. You took Jack Jr. kind of on his own solo journey, so to speak, in the last book, and you kind of now are reintegrating him into a bigger canvas. This is the biggest impact Jack Jr. has had on one of your books. And I will say I haven't read every Jack Ryan Jr. book before you, so I'm not sure if that's true of the whole series, but it's definitely his largest footprint here. So does Mark Cameron still talk to you? I know you talked about sort of trying to deconflict it, but you no doubt had to make him adapt after this one. This is
he still talks to me, but sometimes his tone isn't as respectful as it should be, is what I'm going to say.
You can tell.
There's a pretty funny text exchange between us. At least it's pretty funny now.
Do tell.
Where he's frustrated with me because I haven't figured out, like, I don't know what the book's going to be until I finish writing it. And so he is, sometimes the timing works where he's starting his book before I finished mine. And in fact, this one, it's really bad because I have 2 of my books come out before his next one does. And so Weapons Grade, and I forget what his book is that comes out, we were both writing at the same time. And so he's like, and so at one point, and I don't want to give characters away, but he writes me this text and he's like, is everyone at least ambulatory at the end of your book? Can you tell me that? And I'm like, first of all, watch the tone, but I don't say that because he's a big burly man. He's on criminals. But he was, and rightfully so, because it's the timelines are so compressed, and it's really hard if you're trying to write a book and you don't know, the ending of the book in front of yours yet. And so we did deconflict, because when I went to him, I knew it was going to be a big story. And there was some things I did with Clark that I knew I wanted to use him, but I knew Mark didn't want me to write him as a POV character. And I understood that. And so we kind of war gamed. I'm like, here's how I think I can do it, where I can have Clark in there, but not have him as a POV character. And then the same thing with Jack Ryan Sr. I'm like, I won't write him and not just because, I'm trying to say that I don't want to make Mark mad. I think genuinely, like, both of us approach all of these things with the fans in mind. And I think anybody, no matter how well intentioned, it would be really hard if I wrote a character and he wrote the same character the next book for them not to seem a little bit different. And we didn't want that for the fans. So we did have to war game a little bit about how to do that. But he's a great guy and a great guy to work with, and super supportive. And I have probably made his life harder than it should have been over the last couple of books, for sure.
Well, it just occurred to me as you were telling that story. Did you guys ever think, hey, we should get together and write a Jack Ryan? I mean, has that idea ever been floated as you guys were doing this, to actually co-write one and sort of alternate chapters or anything like that?
That's a good question. I don't, that gives me the heebie-jeebies, because I don't, I talked to the Andrews and Wilson guys, and I think this is a lie. This is their PR, but it's what they'd say every time, is that they claim at the end of the book they don't know who wrote which chapter, because
it's a
lie. It's a lie.
We heard that.
But they pass the chapters back and forth constantly, right, and edit it. Like, I don't want anybody else touching my stuff. Like, this is my book. I'm gonna write it, and that's, and I say that I say it tongue in cheek, but it's also, to me, the first draft is very much like I'm Bear Grylls and I'm trying to kindle that fire, and I got like this little tiny flame, and if I let anybody else in there, it just blows it out. Like, I can't, like, even if I try and verbalize what the book's about, as and before I've written it, as I'm telling the person in my head, I'm like, this is the dumbest idea ever. Like, it just sounds stupid. Why would I even want to write that?
It's a Don Bentley idea.
It's a Don Bentley idea, and it's not going to work. And so exactly. I think it would be really fun to have both of them in there, but I think I would be a terrible, terrible writing partner, and he would kill me.
we all agree with you on Andrews and Wilson, because I know damn well if I wrote a really good line or a really bad line, I would be very conscious of that.
Yeah. Or they have minions. They have minions that just type the stuff and they dictate to them, I think is what happens.
It's like a monastery somewhere, right? I mean, all three of us have been super happy. You know, all the praise that you've gotten and all the, best-selling titles and all this sort of stuff is really, come on strong. But in the entertainment business, it's not always praise, right? Once in a while, you might get, you might see something that's maybe less than stellar or not so awesome. And has any one of them ever stood out to you as kind of almost borderline ridiculous, or something that just really stuck with you that maybe wasn't like the praise that you typically see?
Yeah, and like I said, and I'll preface it by saying that Colgan always gets mad at me when I read the reviews, and he's like, "Don't read them." And I kind of get what he's saying, but I also kind of feel like that's your customer, and they're telling you what you think. You ought to at least listen to what they say. But there's been a couple, like with Flashpoint. In my mind, when I wrote it, I was like, "This is the biggest thing I've ever tried to do." There are so many moving pieces. The scheme, stakes are so big. All of these things are coming together. And there's a couple reviews where they're like, literally, ho hum, it's just another paint by numbers. And I'm like, if this is paint by numbers, I want to see the preview of the paint by numbers, because it about killed me to get all of this to come together. And so, some of those I'm just like,
paint by numbers.
Stay it to my face. That's what I say to him. But
not really.
Now there are some of them where you'll read it and you're like, yeah, I can kind of see why they said that, and maybe I should have paid more attention to it. And those probably, the other ones make you mad. The ones where somebody says something and you're like, they might have a point there. Those are the ones that probably keep me up at night more.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if those, like, whenever you go to Amazon, you see the anonymous reviews, you're like, who is it? Is it Mark Cameron? Is it Mark? is it
school teacher?
Tom Colgan? Is it Albanese?
Tom Colgan with a burner.
Tom Colgan. Burner.
Awesome. Sounds like my wife.
Mark Cameron.
So a little bit of a follow-up. So from the outside looking in, there seems like there's nothing but upside to an author writing in the Clancy verse. Yeah. But I wonder if there are some, if any, drawbacks to writing that series.
I don't think so. I mean,
the answer's got to be no, Don.
Can't say gray hair.
Purposes, the answer is no. There are no drawbacks.
I don't think that. No, I don't think there are any drawbacks. I think it is. It can certainly be daunting, and especially at first, where you're trying to. I think that balance is really important. Of what am I going to do that's a little new here, both for your own sanity and to keep the series vibrant, but at the same time, you don't want to take it too far off the rails, or you don't want to do things. There have been, and I don't want to go into specifics to give stuff away, but there have been, I think at least one time, it might have been two, where I tried to end the book a certain way, and Colgan's like, and he's like, you got to deliver on that. You can't leave that hanging, or you have to. And so
you can't kill John Clark.
I've killed him twice now, and Colgan keeps bringing him back to life.
Chavez is not an amputee. Like,
I wanted him throwing Chinese stars again, like he used to in Clear and Present Danger, and Colgan's like, but no, that didn't happen either. No, I mean, I can't, like, it's an amazing series, and it certainly brings you more recognition for sure. I can't imagine there's a downside to doing it.
Ooh,
good answer.
Well, once again, you alluded to this earlier. I will avoid specific spoilers, but the campus took some heavy body blows in the course of Flashpoint story. When you're doing that, do you just dive into that or are you having any conversation with Tom as you're going, or is this to steal Chris's earlier phrase, are you asking for permission or forgiveness there?
For that one, I had to tell him what I wanted to do ahead of time, because it was, I knew it was going to be a departure from what we'd done, from what anybody had done before. And so if there's ever anything, excuse me, really big that happens, like if you're going to kill a character or something, you got to go back to the estate and clear it with them. And Colgan is the barometer for that. Like, he can look at it and say, yes, this potentially changes the trajectory of the series, and so we got to go to the estate and make sure they have special permission for that. And so so we did, and I don't want to get into specifics because it'll ruin the plot, but there was something else I did with this book that the estate said, no, we don't feel comfortable with that. And so I had to go back and change it and do it. But they did still let me do, I got, I think, where I wanted to go with this book from both the making Jack Ryan Jr. have to deal with some things that he hadn't done before, and potentially steering it a little bit different than it had before. And so Colgan doesn't have an easy job from that perspective, because he's very much aware of, you don't want it to be episodic. You don't want the fans to just be like, oh, for the love, it's the 80th Clancy novel. But also he knows that if you look at, the example I always use is Daniel Silva, I think, has changed his series more than any other author, right? If you look at the beginning, where Gabriel Alon is this dude painting on the English coast, and now, went all the way through and become the director of the Mossad, and then whatever he's doing now, but it's the same writer for that entire series. And so any course changes you make that are kind of abrupt in the Clancy series, part of what Tom Colgan has to keep in mind is you're not going to be the writer he's working with now will not be the writer in this series forever. So anything that I do, sooner or later, somebody else is going to have to deal with that, right? And because there are 2 books a year, Mark, or now the Andrews and Wilson guys, will have to deal with it potentially in their next book. And so he has to weigh all of those things, and he's the guy that sees what Mark's working on and what I'm working on, and potentially what the future is. And so he does a good job in that. But in Flashpoint, like I said, we got dialed back a little bit, and probably rightfully so. But I think the book still worked with what we ended up doing.
Awesome.
Well, there's another junior book coming out in just a few more months from now. We're already talking about fall of 23.
Yeah.
Machine. What can you tell us, if anything, just a little snippet, because we're talking about this book, but we're already looking ahead here. What's the snippet you can give maybe to the viewers for the next one coming up in just a few short months?
Yeah, it's super fun. When I got done with this one, it was so big and had so many moving parts. I told Tom, I'm like, hey, I think I want to write something a lot smaller in a little Texas town, and Jack Ryan Jr. getting in trouble. And he's like, so kind of like almost like a Jack Reacher thing with Jack Ryan Jr. I'm like, yeah, something like that maybe. And he's like, I think that's a great idea. Write it. And so I start writing it, and I have to turn the book around in 5 months to stay on schedule. So about month 4 or 4.5, Colgan sends me this email, and he's like, hey, here are some potential titles, and here's a book cover based on what we talked about. And so I had the inevitable task of writing back to him and said, so about that small Texas town,
fucking changed it.
This would be a great book cover if the book, in fact, still was about a small Texas town. And and so it does. The small Texas town does play heavily in the book. But as I was writing it, I'm like, there's not enough here. Like, there's nothing. There's something that's missing. There's another kind of bigger B story that should tie in here. And so I was getting super, super interested in hypersonics, and I kept looking at, hypersonic missiles and hypersonic bombers and the SR-72 program. And then there's this cool little startup company called Hermeus, which is trying to make the first hypersonic airliner, and the Air Force has given them a big contract to make the first hypersonic drone, and they did all kinds of neat stuff. And so I was like, I think that needs to be part of this book. And so I go back to Tom and I was like, so there's another part now where the Iranians have this clandestine uranium enrichment facility and they're about to hit breakout. And so we need to think about that. And to his credit, he just writes back and he's like, cool. Does this happen? And I say, yes. And he's like, all right, I'll redo the cover. And so he redoes the cover and stuff to do it. But as part of the research for it, so Hermeus they're like PR masters. And so they do these podcasts. And so one of the podcasts they had was this guy who was a former SR-71 pilot. And so I listened to the podcast and I'm like, that's super cool. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, I think I'm going to do this thing for hypersonics. Can I interview you? And so I spent, almost 2 hours on the phone with this guy, and it's hysterical because he flew U-2s, he flew SR-71s. He's a retired 4-star general. And the amount of time, and he's telling me all the technical data behind the SR-71 and the composite materials, but could not figure out how to work the Zoom call for the life of him. And so I'm like a little bit further down with the mouse, click on that thing. And so at the end, I had this idea of bringing the SR-71 back and putting it in the book. And I was like, can I make you the pilot? And he's like, yes, you can. And so he's actually in the book and stuff. That's cool. And so it's super fun. It takes place in this little Texas town, but it also has this global, the Iranians are marching towards achieving nuclear breakout. And like I said, the successor to the SR-71 plays a big role in it. And so what I want to try and do is to get him to be part of the launch and stuff, where he can tell some stories about flying it and stuff like that, because he's super fascinating.
Hey, so there's an SR-71, Don, here in Chantilly, Virginia at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. So why don't you come out here to do a book tour? No one ever comes out here.
I would love to. Unfortunately, they don't do book tours for the Clancy stuff. So I don't know. It would be cool if we could figure out a way to put all that in, and because he lives in Maine. His name is Bob. I think it's Bearher is his last name, but his call sign is Lorenzo. And so he travels around and gives keynotes and stuff. And that would be super cool to have it with the actual SR-71.
Yes, and stuff. That would be cool.
But it was so much fun talking to him.
All right. So before we go to the lightning round, I want to just pivot for half a second. Over your left shoulder is Without Sanction, your debut with the Matrix series.
Yeah,
Hollywood come calling for that series?
Not yet. They keep saying that they're talking to you and you're not forwarding their messages. So I don't know.
Dude, I don't true. Like you. I don't like you.
I knew that, but I thought you'd at least hook a brother up a little bit.
No.
No,
not at all. Not at all.
Never. In fact, when they say 7-figure deals, I was like, please.
So could that be a Gnawbone production? Would you option to us?
We'll option it.
I don't know if you've seen some of our film work, but it's pretty stellar.
I have half a bottle of Craig I could pass along.
We'll film it on my iPhone. My iPhone 8.
Unfortunately not, but it's funny. I was talking with Taylor Moore about it, and he said when he got downrange option, his film agent sat him down and said something. He's like, just to put this in perspective, you have a better chance of going to Mars than your book has of becoming a movie. And he's like, so be happy that it's be option, but realize that because now, between the Night Agent and then, the Terminalist and Mark Graney with Gray Man, everybody's like, well, why isn't your book a movie? And I was like, yeah, I know, I'm a slacker.
So you're that out. The answer to that, honestly, the answer to that is because those books are movies. I mean, it's like it gets crowded, and then you just have to hope that somebody sees the difference in your story.
Yeah. You're saying there's a chance, though.
Yeah,
Musk is going to Mars.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's going to Mars.
That's right.
Might as well be you. All right, so let's raise a glass, boys. For Flashpoint,
swing.
Don, you've gotten through the traditional portion, and now we're going to ask you the stupid portion.
That wasn't the stupid portion.
Like stupider.
No. If I'm asking
really
the
calling
question,
it a stupid person or portion,
it's from a stupid person. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So for my first question, what's one? See, this is a serious question. All right.
I know.
What's one piece of advice you received as a kid from either your dad, your mom, grandparents that you have found yourself passing on to your children, like daily, weekly, or monthly, or whatever?
Yeah. I tell them a lot of times that hard work trumps talent. That if you are willing to put in the time and to grind, you will be more successful than your talent alone will get you there.
Yeah.
And Mark Graney says it a different way. He's told me before that when he's working on something and he gets to the point where he wants to quit. He said, if I want to quit, 99% of the people are probably going to quit. So if I go just a little bit further, then I'm going to go further than 99% of the people do. But yeah.
It's always good to have someone pushing you. There's a lot of things where I've wanted to quit. It's like, we don't quit in this family, so I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like,
I got a lot of quit in me.
It's mostly feedback.
All right. So Don, the real world is one flashpoint away from the next world war. I thought it may have been Ukraine, but as the war drags on, I'm not so sure about that. Do you think that war grows larger and becomes that flashpoint to World War III, or is the next flashpoint Taiwan?
I really think it is Taiwan. I think I don't know that Ukraine grows into the next world war, but I think China is watching Ukraine and watching the Western resolve and making calculations about Taiwan. There's a great I listened to Hugh Hewitt's podcast, and he has a guy on there named Mike Gallagher, who is the congressman from Wisconsin, former Marine officer, intel guy, now chairs the select committee on China. And he has some really interesting analysis on the South China Sea and China's intensity towards Taiwan. And I won't regurgitate all of that, but what I'll say, one of the things that he says that I think is very interesting is he's like, we should be paying attention to what President Xi says to the Communist Party in Mandarin when he makes, or Cantonese or whatever he speaks, when he makes his speeches to that audience. And in that audience, in those speeches, he is very clear about what he sees as China's intentions towards Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
All right. So
Chris,
here's my final question.
Stupid questions. What the heck?
Yeah, well, no, I know those two serious questions.
He's saying I'm stupid. Yeah.
Obligatory stupid question. If Father Cameron and Jack Ryan Jr.'s firearm instructor had to join Junior on his next mission, one of them had to die.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to pick one because obviously I know which one would die. But what would be Father Cameron's last words?
So I'm going to change the answer because I can and say that if you knuckleheads had actually read this book, you would see that there is a third character in Flashpoint who resembles a doctor that's on the call right now, who would save Father Cameron so he wouldn't have to say any last words. Since no,
we weren't spoiling it for him.
We weren't trying to.
We have to edit that out now.
No, because because honestly, like I remember reading Target Acquired, and like my mind went past it. Like I literally just read past the paragraph. And I was like, wait a second. I mean, it was actually the football coach part that actually was like, huh? And so like I honestly, I did not see it coming. So Mike has been busy working, so we knew he hadn't seen that yet.
I hadn't seen
y'all
it
are
yet.
dead to me. Y'all are dead to me.
I gotta buy 50 copies.
Right. Well, before I'm completely dead, I want to ask my questions. Okay, so you're about to take over the Mitch Rapp series, as we talked about earlier. And so Mitch Rapp attended Syracuse University on a lacrosse scholarship. Mm-hmm. Today was the NCAA lacrosse championship. Do you know who won?
Syracuse, obviously.
Nope.
Is that like an all boys high school or something? Is that what that is?
Right.
No, Notre Dame beat Duke 13-9, and I may or may not have won money on FanDuel.
Yeah.
And now, see, See, he mentioned Notre Dame and he froze.
He freezes. Hell froze over because Notre Dame actually won.
They're like, Notre Dame
finally won championship.
I mean, I guess that's a good school if you can't get into Ohio State, I guess, is what it is. I don't know.
Ohio State.
Beautiful.
I'm in Ohio State. My wife in Ohio.
Oh,
in Ohio.
Since he's frozen, I'm just going to move on to mine.
Yeah,
so we can really torture
Mike,
him.
ask your questions.
Yeah. All right. Now that you're a best-selling author, can you demonstrate the secret handshake used amongst your peers?
Mm-hmm.
No, because then I would have to kill you.
Oh,
Again.
that's nice. But you showed me at Schweigert's.
All right, I'm back.
All right.
Well,
Were
Mike's
you
asking this
gone?
question.
I didn't notice. I didn't notice.
Sorry, we didn't.
So anyway, so what I was asking is, you're taking over another famous series, your second one. But if you were going back in time, what classic series or classic novel would Don Bentley have loved to have written a sequel to? Or classic character that you would like to, like Robin Hood, for instance, as an example, but not Robin Hood, because
I'm not a big I'm not a huge literary fiction guy, but I really like The Count of Monte Cristo. I think that is the ultimate revenge story. And so I don't know that I could write a sequel to that, but I think it's I think everybody who writes a revenge story should look at that one, because I think one of the pitfalls you can fall into is that when it feels like it's nothing but the character is just acting out of revenge over and over again, it's hard to keep the rest of that story fresh, and that book does it so well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point.
And then I'm going to go for my last question. I'm going to go the opposite way. So Don Bentley falls on hard times.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
harder than these times, because this is what I'm drinking right now.
Really hard.
Don actually is right when he tells his wife this book sucks and loses his gig. But somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to give you another chance," and they offer you the worst possible series for your talents. What series does Don dread having to take over to put food on the table?
Oh, I got
one. Historical. Let's go historical.
I was going to say he's going to write the Jersey Shore character.
Is it Little Women Part 2?
Yeah, I got it. So there is this hack, and his name is William Shakespeare. And so if I had to go back and write a sequel to Romeo and Juliet, I mean, that dude, I don't know how he got published.
Greg Hurwitz wants to have words with you, by the way. All right, Mike, you have 2 questions left.
I have 2 more questions. So,
my God.
So, who was the most recent author you met for the first time that you might have looked up to before you were published, and did they meet expectations?
So the most recent one, I'd met him briefly, but never really spent any time with him. I said like hi to him, but Greg Hurwitz came to Austin for a signing. And so we were using the same publicist, and they asked if I would go interview him, which was good and terrifying, because he is a smart dude. And so when you ask him questions and he starts quoting from obscure Greek theologians or something, and he's not doing it to show off, he's just that smart, and that's how his mind works. But he is an incredibly caring, good guy. We went out he already had a bunch of people that he was going out to dinner with, and he invited me to go, and that guy spent there were probably 20 people at dinner, and he spent the entire 2 hours just moving from person to person to person to talk to each one, to make sure everybody at the table was talking to each other, everybody. And so he's a great writer. He's wicked smart, and he's a super nice guy as well.
I'm always afraid to talk to him.
I went, Don, were you nodding your head going like you're agreeing, but you had no idea what he was talking about?
Yeah, I was like, I don't even know what he's saying right now. The interview did not start off well because
you were involved.
When I put up that I was interviewing him, I have a friend who is single, and she texted me, and she's like, "Is he single?" And I thought that was hysterical, and I knew he wasn't single. I'd met his wife. And so I started the interview and I was like, I'm going to start with a question from social media because I've never been asked this question. And the first question is Greg Hurwitz single? And he just looked at me and I was like, so moving right along, we're going to go to the next question.
Well, you should have reached out to us, bro. We would help you out.
Yeah, sure. Maybe some lightning round questions to start with next time.
I also got to look like that when I interviewed Brad Taylor for the first time at Poison Pen. And I started the interview and I was like, do you want to tell people about Pike Logan and who he is? And he just looked at me and he's like, this is the 17th book. I think they know who Pike Logan is. I'm like,
wow.
Moving right along.
And he's a friend. Wow.
Yeah. That command voice kicks in.
That just tells you the way I have with people when I interview them. Like I can bring out the worst in everybody.
Next presidential debates. That'd be awesome. All right. My last question. This is a very appropriate one. What's the final score for this upcoming college football season between the Buckeyes and the Fighting Irish?
Remind me who the Fighting Irish are again. I'm
high school. They're high school.
They're the Class 3 high school champions in Indiana, I believe.
Irish treating the Irish as less than. It is an early 19th century or early 20th century.
54-14.
I can't believe we're still fighting this battle.
54-14. Ohio State wins.
Yeah,
right?
probably.
Yes,
definitely.
Yeah.
Hey,
no,
Don. No. That's how we're ending it, Sean. That's how we're ending
it. That's how we end it. People.
Publishers Weekly says Bentley proves himself a worthy successor to Tom Clancy.
He does.
Flashpoint is out in stores. It's out now. Folks, go out and pick it up. Don, you're always welcome on the show. Obviously, we Avengers reassemble just for you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna raise a glass.
That's right.
Cheers, Thanks
cheers,
for
brother.
having me, boys.
All right, boys.
Hey, boys.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
My gosh, Don Bentley back on the
I can't
show.
believe he decided to do that.
Unbelievable. He gets us all back together to talk Flashpoint, the 16th novel of the Jack Ryan Jr. series.
Yeah.
I don't know where John came from, but if John's in the story, he's pretty cool. So let's raise a glass. Don,
you're a machine, boy.
It pains me to say this. You're fantastic.
Yes, it hurts.
Cheers.
Pains you to say cheers. Okay.
And we're still.
No, wait. I'm cheering Mike and Sean.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh,
no.
Okay.
But
Gone too.
goodbye.